Hello, my name is David Benkof, and this session is Philip Roth 101. Now, this is going to be a little bit of a different session, I think you've already noticed, in that I'm giving you lots of stuff. Somebody said that I was the Oprah Winfrey of Philip Roth, and I really am such a fan of his work. I'm excited to share it with you, so much so that I schlepped about 50 books. If you take a book, you have to read it by February 15th. Send me a paragraph, what you think. I've also given you a 28-page booklet that will give you a summary and a highlight of most of his major novels and short stories. List of his 10 best lines that I like. And back here, this is probably the most important thing I'm giving you, which is a checklist. So if you want to read Philip Roth, it gives you my suggestions as to where you should start and what you should read next and what you should read next. So I want to tell you why I'm doing that. And it comes back to this first quote on your blue sheet of paper, which was from the back cover of The Counterline, which is one of his novels. It's a novel about two brothers, each of which dies and each of which survives at a different part of the world. And their relationship with each other. One of them moves to Israel after the other one dies, and one of them moves to England after the other one dies in similar circumstances. And it's one of his most Jewish books. It's a little complicated in structure, but fascinating in theme and content. And look at what the back cover of the version that I bought was. Who has The Counterline? Look at that cover. In this, Roth's most radical work of fiction, people act out their dreams of renewal and escape, some even willing to risk their lives to alter their destinies. What does that mean? There's no content in that description. It doesn't mean anything. That could describe the Bible. It could describe Huckleberry Finn, right? It could describe Gulliver's Travels. This doesn't mean anything, but this is very typical of how people describe Roth's work. They often give sweeping descriptions. I read Goodbye Columbus, Portnoy's Complaint, and The Plot Against America. Loved them all. And I wanted to figure out what's the next thing I should read. And I looked around to see recommendations. And well, there's this trilogy, and then there's this trilogy. I don't want to start a trilogy, right? And there were others that were just described as implying that you had to read other books, or the content was described as vague, and I didn't know what to do. So I just jumped in and I read The Human Stain, and I started reading more, and I started reading more, and I realized it sure would have been nice if somebody had told me, here's what's in this book and here's why it's cool. That's why I put together this session. Philip Roth died in May of this year. Since his death, I've read about 16 of his novels, about 4,500 pages worth. A lot of that I did because I've loved it. A lot of that I did because I wanted to prepare for this session. Philip Roth was born in 1933 in the Week Wake neighborhood of Newark, New Jersey. And many, if not most, of what he writes takes place in Newark. As a matter of fact, many, if not most of what he writes seems to be about him. As a matter of fact, several of the main characters in his fictional stories are named Philip Roth. Not just Philip, but Philip Roth. He also has a character named Nathan Zuckerman who shows up all the time, who's remarkably similar to Philip Roth. And so, on some level, much of what he does has been accused of being autobiographical. And he will say, how can you say that? I don't write autobiography. He has written an autobiography called The Facts, an autobiography, but these are fiction, and I can write about what I want, and how dare you accuse me of being, most often he says, how dare you accuse me of being, which character? Portnoy. Portnoy. Why is Philip Roth so great? Why do I love his work so much? From this book dealer who says, tell me one other writer who 50 years apart writes masterpieces. Philip Roth's first masterpiece, which is Goodbye Columbus, which is a wonderful novella, and with 5 short stories at the end of it, 4 of which are among the finest literature about Judaism I've ever read, about America I've ever read. And one of them, The Conversion of the Jews, is my favorite work of literature of any kind of. That's Goodbye Columbus, and that was written in 1959. Then, in 2010, he wrote Nemesis. Who has Nemesis? All right, and who has Goodbye Columbus? There should be two Goodbye Columbuses. A couple of you have Goodbye Columbuses. He wrote Nemesis, which is a brilliant novel about a polio epidemic that comes to Newark. It's very scary. It's during the end of World War II, and children start to die. So that's pretty scary, and it's very brilliantly written, and 50 years apart, that's 51 years apart. I looked it up. Shakespeare's works, anyone guess how many years apart were Shakespeare's works? 10? 20? 30 years. Oh, good. 30 years apart from Shakespeare's first play to his last play. And obviously that was consistently good, but to be consistently good for 50 years is really an accomplishment. So the second thing that I like about his work, other than its consistency over a very long period of time, is the themes are things that I'm interested in. I'm interested in American Judaism a lot, and in America and in Judaism, and I am interested in sex, which is throughout Philip Roth. And there are two books in here, Portnoy's Complaint and Sabbath Theater, that get a rated NC-17 because they are so filthy you could open to any page and start reading and blush. A writer, Joseph O'Neill's description of Roth's themes. He has a pressing and often recurrent interest in Jews in America and Israel and Europe, the social history of Newark, sex, marriage, illness and aging. Of his last 10 novels, at least 8 of them are really about getting older. The prostate gland, pain, persecution and disgrace, the political landscape of post-war America, masturbation, death, writing, identity and masquerade, desire, life, Nixon, racial and sexual politics, childhood, the dealings of men and women, and baseball. Now Roth himself, he would acknowledge, Roth would say, yeah, that's what I'm interested in, but he has compared his repertoire with his father's conversation. Family, 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 Newark, 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 Jew, Jew, Jew. The third thing that I like about Philip Roth is, while there are hundreds of dissertations that have been written about his work, his symbolism and his meaning is often right there at the surface. You don't have to be a literature professor to get a lot of what he's saying that's beyond the simple words, beyond the pshat, if you will, of what he writes. And for me, the easiest ones to find, and this is a lot of this, I don't know if it's a chiddush, I don't know if I'm the first person to write about it, probably not, but nobody ever told me about these things. The names in his work often have pretty clear meanings beyond what they appear to be. So I've given you 4 examples. The first is from Goodbye Columbus, which is a story about a middle to lower class Jew who is falling in love with an upper class Jew. And the tension in their relationship, the fact that they're having premarital sex and how that differs between the generations. And a lot of it is about class differences within the Jewish community. But he works in a library, and he's quite smart. And his name is Neil Klugman. And anybody know Yiddish or German? What does Klugman mean? Wise or smart or clever man. Then we have my favorite story period, which is The Conversion of the Jews. And you will see at the back of your booklet, if you want to read it, I've taken care of this for you. You've got 3 choices if you want to read The Conversion of the Jews. If you just want to read it, it's online at tinyurl.com/PhilipRoth101A. If you want to see me teach it at Limmud and find a lot of these surface meanings and explain the symbolism and talk with Limmudniks about what it means, tinyurl.com/PhilipRoth101B. And if you just want to listen to it, by Elliot Gould. There's a recording of him on YouTube, which you don't have to search for, because all you have to do is go to tinyurl.com/PhilipRoth101C. Now, the conversion of the Jews takes place in a bar mitzvah classroom. It's about the tension between the generations. It's about a young boy who asks questions that his rabbi won't answer. And most famously, he asked the question, "Rabbi, you say that Jesus is historical. And, okay, but couldn't God make a woman have a baby without having intercourse?" And the rabbi keeps saying, "We don't believe that, we don't believe that." And he says, "Yes, but couldn't God? If God can create the world, couldn't he make a child without intercourse?" And they don't communicate, and he keeps getting in trouble. And the conversion of the Jews, by the end of the story, he has converted everybody to Christianity. And if you read it, it's hilarious. It's hilarious. If you read it, you'll see how. Now, his name is Ozzie Friedman. So in this story, he is the one who is free. And his rabbi is Rabbi Binder, who is binding him. And I cannot imagine how I didn't know this. I've read this story at least 100 times. I've read at least 25 or 30 articles, sections of books about it. And I was teaching how it reminds me of the story of the binding of Isaac, where the adults are kind of sacrificing their children to their own values. And I was in Limmud, South Africa, and I said that, and somebody said, "His name is Rabbi Binder." I had never noticed it. I'd read the story. Yes, you learn more from your students than your students learn from you. I had read it 100 times, and clearly it's not on accident that the guy's name is Rabbi Binder. So it's right there, but you have to look for it. Then we have Sheldon Grossbart, and we'll hopefully get a chance to read some of Defender of the Faith, which is a story about the U.S. Army at the very end of World War II. And in the United States, there is a sergeant who comes back from the European theater, and he is training privates to get ready to go to the Pacific. And the sergeant is Jewish. And 3 of the privates figure, he's like us. We will see if he can give us some special advantages. And they try to take advantage of him. And the story is told from the point of view of Sergeant Marks, who is trying to navigate his, not religious, Jewish identity with his Americanness, with his leadership, and with his connection with these young people that report to him. And one of the characters, his name is Sheldon Grossbart. And he's the one that's really a little pushy and saying, "Look, I know that you don't identify Jewishly very much, but look, I have a big beard. And he's not religious per se, but maybe he puts in Sergeant Marks' mind images of religiosity, sort of like that scene in Annie Hall where Woody Allen looks like a chassid, or feels like he's looking like a chassid in the home of his Gentile girlfriend. And then there's Coleman Silk, who has a human stain. Few of you have a human stain on your chairs. The human stain is one of my favorites. You will see that it's one of the top 4 that I'm recommending in terms of novels that I recommend you read. And every description of the book that I've seen starts with something like, Coleman Silk has a secret. So I read that. I read it on Amazon reviews, and I thought, oh, please. All the secrets have been taken. He was molested. He's gay. His wife is his sister. Whatever. There's nothing. How could there be a fresh secret? Well, trust me. This one will shock you. And Roth reveals it in chapter 2. So instead of it being at the end, now you understand the rest of the book. In The Human Stain, you find out the secret in chapter 2, so you get to watch it unfold through the rest of the novel. And I'm going to say nothing more other than the name Coleman Silk is really symbolic, and meaningful. And that's one, nobody told me that. As a matter of fact, I was in a discussion group about the human stain in Jerusalem, and I raised my hand and said, Coleman Silk, and the teacher, who's a literature professor, said, oh, Coleman Silk, and everybody nodded their head, Coleman Silk. And now you're all wondering, you'll have to read that book, but this is just an example of Roth putting stuff in there that's at the surface, right? Bug, man, Grossbart. You don't have to be a genius to notice that, and if you read or listen to me especially teach online the conversion of the Jews, you'll see how much stuff is there. Now some people might say, oh, well, it can't be good literature if it's so obvious, and I say BS. I say great literature can speak to us on many levels. You probably have heard about Jewish texts having pshat and drash and remez and sod, and in some ways Roth absolutely works on many levels, so that's one of the reasons that I recommend him. At the beginning of his career, the biggest accusation against him is that he was a self-hating Jew. The end of the career is that he was a misogynist. In the middle of the career is that he was a misogynist. In the middle of the career is also that he, and the beginning was that he wrote too much about sex. But Selfhating Jew probably died down towards the end of his career, but it was a big accusation. As a matter of fact, when he published Defender of the Faith with Grossbart, who was not that complimentary to the Jewish people, one rabbi said, well, he wrote a letter saying, well, gosh, in the Middle Ages, we would have known what to do with this Roth character. And there were protests and letters to the editor, and a lot of people very angry, especially with Portnoy's complaint, that Roth created Jewish characters who were not admirable. So Self-Hating Jew was a description, and by the way, there's a difference between writing a character who's a self-hating Jew and being a self-hating Jew. But as I've shared with you, so much of Roth has been read as, well, that's just Roth, and it isn't. Well, sometimes it is. The most famous scene, before I wrote this, who knew that the liver scene was the most famous scene in Roth? Okay. Most famous scene in Roth. Are there any children here? All right, if there are any 12-year-old boys, I'll have them read. If anybody else, I'll have you leave, okay? I'm going to read the liver scene from Portnoy's complaint. On an outing of our family association, I once cored an apple, saw to my astonishment, and with the aid of my obsession, what it looked like, and ran off into the woods to fall upon the orifice of the fruit, pretending that the cool and mealy hole was actually between the legs of that mythical being who always called me Big Boy, when she pleaded for what no girl in all recorded history had ever had. Oh, shove it in me, Big Boy, cried the cored apple that I banged silly on that picnic. Big Boy, oh, give me all you've got, begged the empty milk bottle that I kept hidden in our storage bin in the basement, to drive wild after school with my Vaseline upright. Come, Big Boy, come, screamed the maddened piece of liver that in my own insanity I bought one afternoon at a butcher shop and, believe it or not, violated behind a billboard on the way to a bar mitzvah lesson. In a separate scene in the same book, he violates another piece of liver. His mother finds it and serves it for dinner. Now, notice there's no dirty words here. And a lot of his sex scenes don't have explicit language. Some of them do. Sabbath Theater does. But a lot of times it's the images that he evokes. And boy, is this strong imagery here. And like I said, that's become his most famous, let's say his most famous paragraph. So let's dig in. I want to take a look at some Roth and some of the things that he's written. And Defender of the Faith, remember there, it's Sergeant Marks and the privates. Privates. What's gone on is the privates have said to their sergeant, you know, you have a GI party Friday night. A GR party was everybody had to clean the latrines Friday night. And it's not fair because all of the other Christian soldiers, they can go to their services on Sunday. We can't. Friday night is when our services are. And gosh, we don't want to go. And if we go, then the other privates will accuse us of taking advantage. And so they convince Sergeant March to order them to go to shore. And then he shows up. And that's this scene right here. I took a seat in the last row, which was empty. 2 rows in front of me sat Grossbart, Fishbein, and Halpern, holding little white Dixie cups. Each row of seats was raised higher than the one in front of it, and I could see clearly what was going on. Fishbein was pouring the contents of his cup into Grossbart's, and Grossbart looked mirthful as the liquid made a purple arc between Fishbein's hand and his. In the glaring yellow light, I saw the chaplain standing on the platform at the front. He was chanting the first line of the responsive reading. Grossbart's prayer book remained closed on his lap. He was swishing the cup around. Only Halpern responded to the chant by praying. The fingers on his right hand were spread wide across the cover of his open book. His cap was pulled down low onto his brow, which made it round like a yarmulke. From time to time, Grossbart wet his lips at the cup's edge. Fishbein, his long yellow face a dying light bulb, looked from here to there, craning forward to catch sight of the faces down the row, then of those in front of him, then behind. He saw me, and his eyelids beat a tattoo. His elbow slid into Grossbart's side. His neck inclined toward his friend. He whispered something, and then when the congregation next responded to the chant, Grossbart's voice was among the others. Fishbein looked into his book now. His lips, however, didn't move. I'm going to suggest to you that I believe that Grossbart and Fishbein and Halpern represent 3 types of American Jews. Now, I'm not saying that they're Reformed, Conservative, and Orthodox. I don't believe that. But I believe that there are 3 kinds of American Jews, and there are 3 kinds of American Jews that you see throughout Roth. This is his first story, and these 3 privates show up throughout his work. So look through and tell me what Fishbein is. Give me a little bit of detail on what Fishbein might represent as an American Jew.
Totally assimilated.
He's assimilated, that's right. His attitude towards religion is non-existent. He doesn't want anything to do with it. He stays aloof. He does not pray. He opens the book when he sees that the sergeant is watching, probably because he got out of the GI party to get there, so he has to look like he's praying, but he's not involved. He's not involved. Now, let's go back to our game. Somebody tell me, everybody now knows that Fishbein isn't religious, and his name is Fishbein. What does that represent? Anybody who knows a little Yiddish or German might be able to figure it out.
It's a leg of a fish, and fish don't have legs.
Fish don't have legs, so he is a... He's a fish out of water. He is in the synagogue, but boy, that's not where he goes. I didn't read it any place. I found it myself. And I'm only saying that because you can find stuff that's in there that you don't need a teacher to say, gosh, Fishbein, Coleman Silk. You're going to figure it out if you're in the human city. Whereas Fishbein takes his wine and gives it to Grossbart, Halpern drinks it. Halpern prays. Halpern is traditional, sort of straightforward. And tell me about Grossbart in this scene. What does Grossbart do?
bored.
Huh?
He's a bit bored.
He's a bit bored. Okay.
He's got his cylinder is incredibly closed and he's swishing the cup around.
Okay, he's bored, and then when does he liven up? Yeah.
When he knows he's being watched.
When he knows he's being watched. Okay, so as soon as he knows that Sergeant Marks is in the room, suddenly he starts to pray and he's goes along with it. He's a chameleon. He's a jokester. He is a show-off. You'll see which kind of Jew in Roth I think he's sort of similar to. So, three kinds of Jews. We have Fishbeins. Fishbeins are the ones who are relatively assimilated. He is well behaved, but he really doesn't know what's going on. He's a fish out of water. Then we have the Halperns, who are relatively religious and who stay within the tradition. And then we have the Grossbarts, who are bouncing all over the walls. And they're play acting some of the time. That's Grossbart. What I consider to be a Fishbein. Now, American Pastoral is a novel about somebody named the Swede. A Jew named the Swede, what would you think that would be? A Jew named the Swede. Yeah.
He's blonde and he doesn't look Jewish.
He's blonde, he doesn't look Jewish, that's right. The Swede was in the Marines, he's muscular, he was the jock in high school. And everybody loved him. You're going to see why I think he's a Fishbein. So, but I was never interested in all that stuff, Donnie, meaning Hebrew school. And by the way, if there's two words that I could explain American Jewish alienation from American Judaism, they would be, anybody want to guess? Hebrew school. But I was never interested in all that stuff, Donnie. Back for as long as I can remember, I never understood it. Does anybody? I know what they're all talking about. I go into these synagogues, and it's all foreign to me. It always has been. When I had to go to Hebrew school as a kid, all the time I was in that room, I couldn't wait to get out on the ball field. I used to think, if I sit in this room any longer, I'm going to get sick. There was something unhealthy about those places. Anywhere near any of those places, and I knew it wasn't where I wanted to be. The factory was a place I wanted to be from the time I was a boy. His father had a glove factory, and virtually by consensus, Roth scholars, Roth readers, think that the 5 or 10 pages of Roth about the glove factory is among the most beautiful descriptive prose he's ever written. Just about a glove factory and how it works, which kind of sounds boring. Roth makes it beautiful, which he won the Pulitzer Prize for. So this is one of his finest and best reputed novels. So the factory is the place I wanted to be from the time I was a boy. The ball field was a place I wanted to be from the time I started kindergarten. That this is the place I wanted to be from the moment I laid eyes on it. Why shouldn't I be where I want to be? Why shouldn't I be with who I want to be? Isn't that what this country's all about? I want to be where I want to be, and I want to be where I don't, and I don't want to be where I don't want to be. That's what being an American is, isn't it? In America, my question is, in America, is being where you want to be what America is about? So I'm going to ask you to think about aspects of America, and that could be a historical figure, it could be a symbol, it could be a kind of value that represents the Swedes' vision of America, and if you have something that's different, hold it, and I'll ask you to give me something about America that means America is not about being who you want to be. And I'll just give you one, which is Johnny Appleseed. The story of Johnny Appleseed is somebody who loves trees, and he's a famous, famous American character, and he goes out throughout the land of America planting apple trees, creating the land of America in his image, which is apple seeds.
Benjamin Franklin.
How is that? Tell me about that.
Because he invented something. He was knowledgeable, and again, he was somebody who set the foundations for America.
Absolutely. He was one of the founding voices, and he invented things. He created America in part in his own image. He wrote lots of quips. He discovered electricity by flying his kite with a key, and all kinds of stories. And by the way, the remembered Benjamin Franklin may be more important than the actual Benjamin Franklin when it comes to my question I'm asking.
So this, to me, sounds a little bit like the American dream.
Okay, good, good.
And the American dream is you can make it, you can make a lot of money.
Yeah.
And in fact, if you make money, you can move. So you can be wherever you want to be. You can
Excellent.
move out of wherever, right? And you go to the suburbs, you buy a big house,
Yeah.
and whatever, all of these.
So let me take one that's how maybe the Swedes' vision of America is not what America is. Yes?
Draft dodgers from Vietnam.
Oh, okay.
Because really a patriotic American should be pleased to be drafted. But
Well, guess what American Pastoral is about? It's about the Vietnam War. Did you know that? All right, that's not fair. It's about the Vietnam War, and it's about his daughter. I'm going to move on. It's about his daughter, who was an opponent of the Vietnam War. His complaints about Hebrew school are about health. He says that they're sick and they're unhealthy places. What is the connection between Judaism and sickness? Yes?
Is it like the idea that, you know, he wants to be outside, he's 40, doing all this stuff, and he's just being told, like, to sit in a room, you know, hunched over a desk. There's this perception of kind of, you know, weedy Jews.
Yeah. Who says Jews are sick?
Well,
Anti-Semites say Jews are sick. Right?
Well, but Jews do too. I mean,
All right.
sort of hypochondriaism
So-
is a pretty, particularly in that age, was a Jewish
and
value.
trust me, Portnoy's mother absolutely was always, oh no, we have to save you. You coughed, oh, we have to take care of you. Yes, hypochondria is a theme in Roth. Okay, do you see there's an argument that here's Fishbein? Is that fair? Maybe he's Fishbein? So, I want somebody, I'll give you the next two questions and I'll have somebody do it. What does this paragraph, this selection, say about American Jews? And then I want somebody who's not American to tell me if whatever we find that it says about American Jews applies to their country too. So what would you say that this selection from American Pastoral says about American? You don't have to be American to answer this question. But yes?
I think it's suggestive of the idea he's asking questions because he doesn't see himself as part of the monolith that forms the American values. He's an outsider. It's quite an immigrant kind of mentality, even though he's American.
American Jews, because we're an immigrant society, have felt themselves on the outside. And he is, even though the paragraph is about him being on the outside of the Jewish community, what I'm hearing you say is it might be related to Jews being on the outside of the American society. That's excellent. Okay, somebody who isn't American, who can talk about whether what we just said applies to their country. Yes?
Well, I come from Argentina.
Okay.
Judah is there, it's very secular. So you can be Jew, you can belong to a Jewish society, and have no religion indication whatsoever. So you eat a fish, you do everything,
Yeah.
but you know absolutely nothing about the Torah.
So maybe that is like the Swedes.
I think it's
Yeah.
very similar, except
Okay.
in the States, Orthodox education is stronger.
Okay. So let's take a look at a Halpern. And we're going to look at a selection from, as I've said, my favorite work of literature, period, which is The Conversion of the Jews, and it's on page 5. Ozzy had planned to confess. I mean, I'm going to keep doing this because this story is just filled with Christian symbolism, and like the number 3 is all over this book. When I teach it to bar mitzvah students, I say, just call out 3 when you find it. Last time I taught it at Limmud, they found 2 3s I didn't know were in it. Again, kids told fun 2-3s. Again, this story is so rich. He planned to confess his latest transgression to his mother as soon as she came home from work. But it was a Friday night in November, and already dark, and when Mrs. Friedman came through the door, she tossed off her coat, kissed Ozzie quickly on the face, and went to the kitchen table to light the three yellow candles, 2 for the Sabbath and 1 for Ozzie's father. When his mother lit the candles, she would move her 2 arms slowly toward her, dragging them through the air as though persuading people whose minds were half made up. And her eyes would get glassy with tears, even when his father was alive. Ozzie remembered that her eyes had often gotten glassy, so it didn't have anything to do with his dying. It had something to do with lighting the candles. As she touched the flaming match to the unlit wick of a Sabbath candle, the phone rang, and Ozzie, standing only a foot from it, plucked it off the receiver and held it muffled to his chest. When his mother lit candles, Ozzie felt there should be no noise. Even breathing, if you could manage it, should be softened. Ozzie pressed the phone to his breast and watched his mother dragging whatever she was dragging, and he felt his own eyes get glassy. His mother was a round, tired, gray-haired penguin of a woman whose gray skin had begun to feel the tug of gravity and the weight of her own history. Even when she was dressed up, she looked like a chosen person. And by the way, one of Ozzie's questions he got in trouble for is, how can the Jews be the chosen people if the Declaration of Independence says all men are created equal? Which is a very American Jewish question, and Rabbi Binder had no conception of how to answer it. But when she lit candles, she looked like something better, like a woman who knew momentarily that God could do anything. And remember, that's his question for Rabbi Binder, the question that means that he tries to convert the Jews, which is, whoa, don't you believe that God can make a woman have a baby without intercourse? That's the central question of the story, and here, that's what we see. So I think this is a Halpern. This is, now you'll see, there's lots of Christian symbolism here, and Ozzie doesn't go along with Rabbi Binder, but here there's a reverence. There's a honor to the Jewish tradition that I think is beautiful, that I think makes him seem like a Halpern. And yet Rabbi Binder would utterly reject this scene. Why?
The answer is the phone.
Okay, but that's not the main reason. What?
Shabbat has come in, and already they're lighting.
It's November after Shabbat is down, and he even emphasizes the unlit candles, right? She's lighting, this is the most religious, most pious scene in the story, probably in the whole book with the novella and 5 stories, and yet it's not something the rabbis would approve of. Yes?
She's a single mother, and she has to work. If they really wanted to keep Shabbat that badly, they should be supporting her.
Well, it's an interesting question that I sometimes have. It's a conversation that I have lots of Reform friends and lots of Orthodox friends. It's a conversation where they talk completely past each other. If I tell my Reform friends, well, my Orthodox friends say that in this scene, my Orthodox friends say she shouldn't light the candles. They're like, she shouldn't light the candles? Of course she should light the candles. She's welcoming in Shabbat. It's a way of connecting her to her late husband. It's a way of having the family begin Shabbat. Why would they say not to light the candles? And then my Orthodox friends, I'll tell them that my Reform friends, they would light the candles on Friday night. They say, why would they light the candles? It's Friday night after the sun is set. That doesn't make any sense. Sure, bring in Shabbat late, but not with the candles. Candles are the opposite of Shabbat. It's one of these things where conversations go right past each other within American Judaism. What does it say about American Judaism? And then does what it says about American Judaism apply to your country, wherever it may be? What does it say about American Judaism? Yes?
It's all about kind of how you feel rather than the detail. So it's not halachically, none of that, like there's the candles and the phone and everything else, but there's some sort of spiritual connection there.
So Roth is probably telling us that American Jews really should be caring about the heart, should be caring about relationships, should be caring about symbolism, and not about the letter of the law, not about what binders have to say to us. Is that something that would be a message that you might hear in England or wherever you live? Somebody who could answer that question? Someone in the back who might be able to answer that question. Yes, sir.
Answer you asked.
Well, give me an answer. Give me your answer.
Yeah, my answer is that.
You got to tell us your country. What country are you from?
I'm from England, I'm from Israel.
All right.
I was brought up Orthodox. I got on the law. So for me, it's more important to follow the spirit of the law and to have, to have a Jewish life, and culturally, do things that are important for you,
Yeah.
rather than following kind of all these kind of nitpicking rules about not mixing too much milk.
Yeah. As I understand, in England, there are an awful lot of people who consider them Orthodox, who consider themselves Orthodox, that they go to an Orthodox synagogue, but they might have home lives that are like that. That's what I've been told. So maybe that's a little bit different than in what the expectation is in America, but it sure does resonate with what Roth has said. Yeah.
I come from Norway.
Oh.
And there are so many minhags, sub-minhags, from people coming from Central Europe, from Eastern Europe, from wherever. So it's a whole map of who is doing what when. So I feel that this resonates with that for me.
So let's look at a Grossbart, and his name is Alexander Portnoy. And his story in Portnoy's complaint is basically a monologue to his psychiatrist. And a lot of you, raise your hand if I've given you a Portnoy's complaint. A lot of you have a Portnoy's complaint, right? Raise your hand just so we see. He just confesses about his lust for shiksas and about a lot about whacking off. There's a whole section called whacking off. Masturbation is a major theme of Portnoy's complaint. He writes about his attitude towards Judaism and his mother and how she smothers him. The description of his mother is just so well written. I almost gave it to you, but I chose to give this to you instead. And I want you to look, while I read this to you, there are various linguistic styles. Listen for biblical styles, bar mitzvah speech styles, communist rhetoric, and psychoanalytic verbiage. I will say that they're all in there. If it's bad for the Goyim, it's good for the Jews. Can't you see, my dear parents, from whose loins I somehow leaped, that such thinking is a trifle barbaric? That all you are expressing is your fear? The very first distinction I learned from you, I'm sure, was not night and day or hot and cold, but Goyisha and Jewish. But now it turns out, my dear parents, relatives, and assembled friends who have gathered here to celebrate the occasion of my bar mitzvah, it turns out, you schmucks, you narrow-minded schmucks, oh, how I hate you for your Jewish narrow-minded minds, including you, Rabbi Syllable, who have for the last time in your life sent me out to the corner for another pack of Pall Mall cigarettes, from which you reek, in case nobody has ever told you. It turns out that there is just a little bit more to existence than what can be contained in those disgusting and useless categories. And instead of crying over he who refuses at the age of 14 to ever set foot in a synagogue again, instead of your wailing for he who has turned his back on the saga of his people, weep for your own pathetic selves. Why don't you? Sucking and sucking on that sour grape of religion. Jew, 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 Jew. It is coming out of my ears already, the saga of the suffering Jews. Do me a favor, my people, and stick your suffering heritage up your suffering ass. I happen also to be a human being. And I have two things I want to say about this passage. One is, look at all those styles. He's jumping all over the place. His language comes from a variety of different places, and that's because it's related to the setting. This is a stream of consciousness where he's supposed to say whatever comes to his mind, not to a therapist, but to a psychoanalyst who just says, you know, tell me what's on your mind. And, and one of the things you talk to your psychoanalyst about is sex. Another thing is your mother. It's about your feelings towards your religion. And he just lets loose. And you see how in this piece, he really lets loose. So I have a few things to say in conclusion, which is I really hope that you have been turned on to some of what Roth has done. There are way more of you than I anticipated, so I apologize for those of you who didn't get a book and who didn't get a booklet. Those who didn't get a booklet, that's easy. Just send me a note. I have left, well, I'll tell you in a second. Send me a note. My email address is David Benkof, that's my name, @gmail.com, and I'll just send you a booklet. If you didn't get a book, some of the people up here are going to leave their books behind. And that's because if you take a book, you're committing to read it. And I've given you a little yellow slip, and I want you, by February 15th, to send me a one-paragraph review with your first name, which is going to go on my website, philiproth101.com. I have a budget to go to Limmud's and to scholar residencies. So if you'd like me to come and speak, you don't have to pay me to get there. So I'm very interested in doing more talks. I've got a variety of things that I do. And thank you so much for participating and for coming.